Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In early April, the Fed announced the first version of the Main Street Lending Program. That announcement described certain basic features of the program, like the maximum loan amount and the rates and terms for loans. A few weeks later, the Fed announced major changes to the program. Many of those changes lined up exactly with what members of the oil and gas industry had requested. That did not appear to be a coincidence. Shortly before the changes were announced, President Trump publicly promised that oil and gas companies would be taken care of. And then shortly after the changes were announced, the Energy Secretary went on TV and bragged about how he and Treasury Secretary Mnuchin had succeeded in getting the Fed to make changes that the oil and gas industry wanted. But when asked by reporters, a spokesperson for the Fed denied that the Fed had made any adjustments out of consideration for the oil and gas industry. Instead, the Fed said that the April changes reflected the more than 2,000 public comments that the Fed had received about the initial design of the program. So President Rosengren, as the regional Fed president responsible for the Main Street program, do you stand by the Fed's earlier statement that certain adjustments were not made specifically to help oil and gas companies?
I do. This is a broad-based program. It's been a broad-based program from the start. 13.3 facilities require broad-based kinds of terms, and so it's not targeted at specific firms or specific industries. 13.3 facilities are not available for that kind of lending.
Thank you. And look, I want to focus specifically on the changes that were made to the facility in April. Let's look at one of them. According to Reuters, in mid-April, one of the key changes the Energy Secretary and Treasury Secretary were pushing for to help the oil and gas industry was increasing the maximum loan amount to at least $200 million. A couple weeks later, when the Fed announced its changes to the Main Street program, the maximum loan amount had gone up to exactly $200 million. President Rosengren, out of the more than 2,000 public comments that were submitted to the Fed on the Main Street program, are you aware of a single one that requested increasing the maximum loan amount to $200 million?
We got many comments from both banks and businesses that if the loan amount was larger, that it would be more attractive facility for them. Remember, a lot of this discussion was occurring in March and April. The economic conditions and the pandemic conditions were very different at that time. And there was a lot of concern that some fairly large businesses would have difficulty getting financing. Fortunately, the pandemic subsided, at least for a couple months. And as a result, many of those large borrowers that thought that they were going to need the financing, at least to date, have not actually accessed the program. I would highlight.
Just in the interest of time, I want to move on because, look, I reviewed each and every one of those 2,000 plus comments, and there wasn't a single one that requested specifically a $200 million maximum loan amount. The only people making that request were the Energy Secretary and the Treasury Secretary after meetings with the oil and gas industry. Here's another change. The first version of the Main Street program required companies to say in writing that they needed the loan, quote, due to the exigent circumstances presented by the COVID-19 pandemic. Advocates for the oil and gas industry pushed to eliminate that requirement, presumably because many oil and gas firms were struggling before COVID and couldn't satisfy the requirement. And again, in the final version, the Fed eliminated that requirement. President Rosengren, again, out of the more than 2,000 public comments that the Fed received, are you aware of a single one outside the oil and gas industry that requested that the Fed remove this important requirement?
In the discussions I've been involved in, we do not discuss specific industries. We discuss how we can provide a broad-based financing scheme.
Okay, I just want to, again, I appreciate that, but again, I reviewed the public comments, and there wasn't a single one that requested this change. Only the oil and gas lobby had requested it. So I just want to ask one more time. Despite evidence that President Trump wanted oil and gas companies to get federal relief, that the Energy Secretary and the Treasury Secretary pushed the Fed for specific changes to accommodate the oil and gas industry, and that the Fed made changes that the oil and gas industry requested, but no other industry or group requested, is it still your position that the Fed did not make certain changes to accommodate the oil and gas industry?
It is my position that the focus has been a broad-based lending program, not focused on any particular industry.
Okay, look, I think that, again, my focus is on specifically the changes that were made, not the overall scope of the program. And I think the evidence here is strong and deeply concerning. This is just not how the Fed is supposed to operate. The Fed is not supposed to be changing the rules of these programs so that the president's favorite companies can get access to billions of dollars in public money. In fact, it is illegal for the Fed to structure these lending programs to help specific companies avoid bankruptcy. I urge this commission to further investigate this issue, including by requesting all communications on this topic between the Fed and the Energy Secretary, the Treasury Secretary, and any representatives of the oil and gas industry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Congresswoman Shalala is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you.